Hello, I'm Mark Tucker.
Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg. Welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Hey, Ellen.
Hey, Mark, how is it going?
Fine.
Oh, it's going to be one of those nights, I can tell.
Oh, I've so needed this week. It's been a crazy week.
Oh, I totally hear you.
Just hang out with my friend and talk to about voice stuff.
It feels like I don't talk enough about voice stuff these days, and I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, it's
These
really fun.
days,
And
God,
I was gonna say, especially when there's new things.
that's true. There was no announcement recently about APL, which is really exciting.
APL, yes, it is, and it's I think it's something that we should speak about. Mark should speak about it.
I definitely think this is a Mark topic, all about Mark.
A
It's
speech
all
mark.
about Mark.
So one of the announcements that came out with APL, the new version, 2023.1, which is the new version of APL, is that they have added a new event and the ability to do speech marks. Alan, talk to us about what speech marks are.
So one of the really cool features that I liked about interactive canvas on the Google side was that in the SSML you could include the Mark tag,
I
and
like that mark
yeah,
tag.
it was a tag that I know you always had great affinity to,
Yes.
even though it didn't work on the Alexa side. But what was neat about the mark tag is that as it was reading it off, if the interactive canvas was active, it would fire an event when it hit that mark tag. So you could do really cool things like, have speech bubbles appear, but only appear as you were getting to part of what was being said, or show part of it. And as you kept talking, change it to the next part and so forth and so on. So you could have a dynamic output that was directly related to the audio. So dynamic visuals related to the audio. Um,
Okay.
you could think of it as um, coordinating your syncing up video and audio, which back in the theater days was a big deal, and it's a big deal also in the voice world. I think one of the real frustrating parts though was that Alexa didn't support this. The other frustrating part was that this was only supported for interactive canvas, which meant it was only supported for games on the
Right.
Google side. So there were, I had a lot of very cool demos of this feature, which never saw the light of day because they weren't games. So what do we have now? What was part of the APL announcement regarding marks?
Okay. So I need to give just a little bit of history because there's only a certain case where it works. So um, let's imagine you have an Alexa skill that does not have a display. So it's only a smart speaker,
Okay.
and part of the response that you send back from Alexa can be text that is spoken. It could be just plain text, or you could have SSML. What happens is that gets sent back as part of the response that goes through the Alexa service that turns that into audio, which then sends that down to the device, and the device plays the audio. So that's the way that it's been since the beginning. So at some point in time, a couple of years into it, they created this thing called APL. And the way that you show an APL document is that as part of that same response, you add a directive that says this is the document to show. Well, it can show the document and it can still play that same text response back, but they're kind of separate from each other. It says show this on the screen and at the same time play this. They're
Okay.
they're they're kind of like in two different places. They're not, they don't talk to each other.
And APL, just for those who may have forgotten, is Alexa presentation language. Do I have
Correct.
that correct? Okay.
Yep. Yep. And that's the way that design, screens, and it could be used for anything. It could be for use for education, animation, your normal apps. It could be business stuff. So, but that's APL is the way to way to do things. So this approach does not work if that's what you do. And a lot of what I've done is been that way, partly because it's lazy and partly because I can do the same audio response whether it has a screen or it doesn't have a screen.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is going to require you to do a little bit different or do something different in the cases where you want to have this interactivity based on the mark tag. So let me explain another way that you can do audio that's more based inside of APL itself. So inside of the APL document, you can have the document section, which is the actual like root component, visual component tree, and you have different things. There's a data portion.
Describes the part that describes the layout.
Yeah, it's the screen. It's the HTML for the screen, right? Then there's a section, basically.
But it's not HTML.
It's not HTML, but it's that same purpose. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to confuse anybody. There is definitely not HTML in there. But yeah, it's kind of the same purpose of it's providing the layout and the structure and the components of the screen. So the other part of HTML is a data source. They call it a data. It's a JSON document. You can use that to put text and other values that you want to then bind to different properties inside of your APL. You could do that because you want to maybe reuse your screen and translate it for different languages. And so all you would have to do is have a different data file that's for that language. There's lots of different things that you can do. But the way that you have to do speech inside of APL, if you want to do it this other way, is you define text inside of your data document. And that could be plain text or it could be SSML. And then you have to define transformers inside of that same JSON document. And that's just a different section of the JSON document where you have to say, this is the transform that I want to run. In this case, I want it to do a text to SSML transform. You specify what the input data property is and what the output property is. So it's just kind of configuration. And then when this document gets run, what ends up happening is that there's a transformation that happens behind the scenes.
So to make sure I follow this, so as part of the data section, you're going to be providing some text, which can be formatted as text or SSML. Mm-hmm. As part of that data, you're also going to create another data object, which is the result of transforming that string into audio. And that's going to be saved as another data node, which we can reference elsewhere.
Yeah. So it's the format's a little bit different. You have to have a specific array section inside of your JSON document for transformers, and then one object for each of the different transformers that you want to do. So, for example, you can do if you've got one text node someplace else in your JSON, in your properties section that says this is the text and it's SSML, maybe you want to show that on a screen, and maybe you also want to speak that out loud. So you would have two transformers. You would have a SSML to speech transformer that would reference that other property, let's call it narration, and then have that transform that into some sort of output, and maybe that's like narration speech. Then if you wanted to also have that as text, you would use an SSML to text transformer. You would still use that same narration as the input path, and then the output name could be narration text.
Got it. So, okay.
And now it's as if the transformer section is, after the transformation happens, it's like that's not there anymore. And it's like those output node names, the narration speech and the narration text, are living in your document right next to the narration that has the string that actually has the SSML.
I got it. No, it makes perfect. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. It's basically saying we're going to define this is in your data document. So we're defining some data. Plus, we're also defining transformers on some of that data, which is going to
Right.
produce new data. That all makes sense to me. I got it. Okay.
Okay. So then what you're going to do in your document is if you say, this is the, let's say that your component that you have in your APL is a text component. Your text component has a text property. You could do a data binding expression saying, I want to get to my, properties dot narration text. So then that data binding happens. And so when that text component is rendered on the screen, then you see the text. So every component also has, regardless of what type of component it is, it could be an image, has a speech property on it. So you could use that narration speech field that was generated from the transformer. We can do a data binding expression to bind that speech property to that component. It doesn't matter which component, but we assign it to a certain component. Now the trick is that component also has to have an ID, because what needs to happen is some sort of like a button click or some sort of a command, some sort of event that's going to trigger something, needs to execute a command called a speak item command. And that speak item command needs to have a property, which is the ID of the component that has the speech property. At which point in time, if I were to click the button, it would find that component, and then it would speak out whatever was in that speech property.
Okay. So quick question first, though. Can you trigger a speech item on page load or page render?
I'm pretty sure you can. I don't see why you can't.
Okay.
Yeah, there's on mount. Like the whole document has an on mount event. Every component that gets rendered has an on mount. Mm-hmm. Like if it's a pager control, there might be an event when you swipe and you get to a new page. So you could see different things where something happens and it swipes to a new page, and then it starts speaking the thing that's on that page, and then different animation things happen, and then maybe you're done with that and you hit the next button and it swipes and it starts over. So mm-hmm. You can kind of see where you might have, you could do like a comic strip or a little story, animated story or something like that. There's lots of different things that you could do with this. So that's just speaking, and that's been around for multiple iterations of APL.
Okay.
So what is new is the onSpeechMark. So that is an array. It's like an event handler. So what's going to happen is, and it's got to be on that same component that you have your speech, because that's onSpeechMark property goes with the speech property on that same component. So as the speech is happening on that component, events are being raised, and that onSpeechMark event is triggered for that, and then you can do different things with it. So let's talk about the different types of events. There's different types of speech marks that get triggered on this event.
Oh,
you can have one
okay, that seems interesting.
You can have one per sentence, one per word, one per speech mark tag.
Okay.
And one per, what is it? Visimi? It's the different facial changes as things are speaking.
That's very okay. So that's all very interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, the first is that it goes beyond a speech mark tag.
Yes.
That's just, that was the only thing that was supported on the Google side, was you would get an event fired when the speech started, when it finished, and then every time you had a mark tag. But this sounds like it's got fake mark tags all over the place that can get triggered.
Yeah,
and you can key on those. So that's very interesting.
So you can get very simple. Like if you know that your string has a certain word in it and you want something to happen on that word, all you have to really do is um, because APL has conditionals, you can set a when inside of that onSpeechMark event handler and say, I only want to trigger these commands when the 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 value is the word, hello, or so you don't even necessarily have to check for what type it is. You can check just to see if the
Uh-huh.
value is a certain thing, or you can say you want to do something every time a sentence happens. Um, and maybe you've got something where maybe it is like a some sort of a pager thing where first sentence is this thing, and then it reads it, and when that sentence happens, you want to navigate to the next page, and you could just have it read off and auto navigate.
Now,
um,
now, do you know? So okay, two things. First, when you register the handler, are you registering it only for certain types?
no, the event's going to get called for every type, but then you use the when property that's part of the conditional that's part of APL to ignore the things that you don't care about.
Okay, so and you can register more than one handler for on SpeechMark. Did I
Yeah,
get that right?
onSpeechMark is an array. So yes, you can
Okay,
have multiple, and each of those can have when clauses, or you can have like a sequential or a parallel event that then includes children. So there's ways of composing parent-child relationships so that you can turn some on and turn other off, or do multiple animations, or you can even create your own custom commands, which are really just groups of other things. And then once you define that custom command, you could use the custom command in place of all the components of it and have that be the thing that gets acted on.
that one may have to come up for another time because that sounds like a
It
30 minutes all on its own there.
is.
So what other information is sent with each event? So presumably we get event type. I assume
Yes.
for like sentence and word events, we get the sentence and word.
You know what? I need to experiment with it. But the two properties that I can, well, the three properties actually that I see that come with the event is there's the mark type. So for every event that comes
Okay.
in, you can check the mark type and say, oh, I only want to deal with this if it's a word or if it's a mark type. Um, there is the mark value. So in the case of if the type is marked word, I know that the value is each of the words as it goes through and is being spoken. So I could only assume the same thing with the sentence, that if the mark tag was a sentence, then the mark value would probably be that sentence. That would only make sense. Um, so what it seems like to me is, let's say that you've got a string, your SSML string has two sentences, sentence one and sentence two, and sentence two has a mark tag in it. What I think probably has is, as it starts to speak it, it says, oh, here's the first sentence. Event as mark tag sentence, here's your sentence. Okay, first word. Here's your mark
Word,
tag of
yeah.
type word, first word, second word, third word. Okay, oh, second sentence, blah, word. Oh, mark tag. And I'm assuming mark tag wraps a word or words. So then
Mark,
you could,
mark, no, a mark tag
well, let's see.
is just a tag, I think, or that's
All
it
right,
doesn't wrap anything.
let's take a peek. So yeah, it could be just a tag, or it could wrap things. Let's see. It's pointing me towards mark tags and the poly documentation. So let's see. Oh, and it's got the mark tags and poly, it's got the same thing. So maybe that would give us a little bit more descriptions. But the four mark types in poly are sentence, word, visimi, and SSML. Um,
Okay.
so let's take a look at the mark tag. The syntax is the mark tag itself with one property, name equals
Mm-hmm.
something, and then the end tag. You're right. It's a standalone tag. It doesn't wrap anything. So it is just a placeholder. So I'm assuming when you have a mark tag, then the mark type is going to be mark,
And
and
the
then
value is the
the
name.
value
Yeah.
is the name, the value of the name property that you specify.
Okay. So you said there were three properties. What's the third one?
Oh, the third one is mark time. It will tell you
Ooh,
what part
interesting.
you are in the overall. I guess I don't know if it's number of seconds in, or what is it? Let's see if it tells me any more in the documentation.
I
Um,
would guess that it's milliseconds.
the start. So yeah, it's the start time of the speech mark in milliseconds. So you can say that this happened so many milliseconds into it. Now,
Very
what I
interesting.
don't know is if there is a way to know how many milliseconds the whole thing is.
That would
So,
be
like,
interesting.
could you do a progress bar as you're talking? It would progress bar through to the end. I don't know that. I'm not sure exactly how you would use that, but it does figure out, because I basically, and it seems like what's really happening behind the scenes is that it's really just using Poly to generate the text to
Yeah.
speech anyway, um, and so
I,
it
I
it
I
it
know that
should
on the
know,
I
yeah.
know that on the Google side, on Google text to speech, what the mark tags do is they create, and as part of the output that gets sent back along with the audio file, you get an
Mm-hmm.
array of how far into the audio file each mark tag was.
So that's what Poly shows. Actually, it says the SSML metadata includes the time, the type, the start and end. I'm assuming that's in characters, and the value. But what is? Yeah, we're gonna have to investigate that. That's
That one's
definitely
going to be
something
interesting because
I want
there's
to
a
play
lot
with.
that you can do with that value. I mean, as you said, you've got a progress bar is one of the things.
That's the simple
Um,
one. Yeah.
I was also thinking of things that you have you record this value, you store the value that comes back in another data object, and if you interrupt it or push a button in acknowledgement as you're going through this, you know where you were,
Oh,
and
all
there's
right.
all sorts of things when you press the button or interrupted it, and there's all sorts of things that you could do at that point.
Yeah, that could be one. It could be like analytics stuff that you care about with using the app, or it could be a mini game, right? Or
Or if you're reading off a list, I now know which item in the list you've just read off,
oh, that's interesting.
and now you can have, because this is one of the things we've talked about a lot in saying, if I'm reading off a list and I say, yeah, that one, well, which one? Now we have at least some reference to know which one that was if we're keeping count.
Another way you could do that is before each of the items in the list have a different mark tag,
Yes.
and as it's going through, record what the mark tag was, or keep a value of the last mark tag that happened, and
Yep.
then you would know where they stopped on it.
Right. This now, you even if you just keep a counter so that
Yeah,
every time we went through a sentence, I increment the counter, I know, okay, I was interrupted on the third sentence.
very interesting.
And, I also suspect that if you, I mean, I don't know how to necessarily do some of this, and it may not be possible, but now if you do something like interrupt it, we know where it was interrupted, at least the last start of sentence that it was interrupted at. Can I
Yeah,
return back to that point? Set the playback to start
right.
playing back at 300
Yeah.
milliseconds in.
Uh,
And if you can't do that today, will we be able
yeah.
to do so in the future?
Yeah. I see that. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, the last type that we talked about was the Vesimi, and I don't really have a lot of experience with this, but my understanding is that it would fire at different points as things are speaking, and you could potentially animate a face to speak. So like if you're saying, oh, then you can make the mouth do like, oh no,
Yeah.
Mr. Bill, um, or whatever, right? Um, so then you could start working on some sort of an avatar interface for for your application, for your game. You could be talking to somebody on in your game on a like
Well,
a communication device, and they could be talking back, and you could see their face moving. Or
right. No, what it definitely means is, I don't know if any of the digital twin systems, the avatar systems that are out there now could work inside Alexa. Do they
yeah,
will
that's
they
interesting.
do they give what format will they output things in?
Yeah, so
Um,
if the formats were like just image files, like a series of image files, one for each of the different types, you could do that. Or if it was somehow with an SVG, you could convert that SVG into AVG, as long as it only had certain types of SVG tags. So that might be another way that you
there
could do
there
it. So
there are
there
certainly
are,
things that you can do. I mean, one of the things that I did for the interactive canvas was I had a my Shakespearean insult action, um, which was fun to do, but the animated version of it, which nobody saw, had when Shakespeare was talking, his mouth moved up and down. Um, the insults that he was giving as he spoke each one appeared on the screen. Um, and when he wasn't saying anything at all, his mouth was quiet and he was kind of looking around, suspiciously. And all of that was done using, uh, you know, using PNG files and moving the PNG files around.
yeah.
And I feel like you can do the same sort of thing on Alexa.
Oh yeah, it seems like everything's in place for something like that. That would be fun. I'm excited to see what people do with it. And
There is a lot of potential here. One one interesting thought. I know that one of the more esoteric features that was in Google's SSML, and Alexa does it completely differently, is what I would used to refer to as the multi-track feature.
mhm.
So you could have, a track of spoken audio and then another track of background music, for example, that kept repeating.
Yeah.
Um, I think it would be interesting to see if the onSpeechMark tag works with that for starters, and then what you can do with it. Because there are a bunch of interesting things you can do with it. So for example, as your background trumpet tag repeats, change the background on your screen. Or as if you're having multiple people talking in in multiple tracks,
Yeah.
because you can sync tracks to appear one after the other. Have a speech mark tag at the beginning of each one, indicating who it is, and changing the screen to show a different perspective.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely something I've got to play around with that to better understand it, because I haven't really done much with the speech property and the speak item command, and kind of this inside of APL um, processing stuff. I don't. There's enough stuff that I need to learn with that. But I also know that there's APL for audio,
Oh, right.
which is it was kind of created to handle the situation where you want to have multiple tracks playing at the same time. But I don't know exactly how that fits in with APL, or how it fits in specifically with this new feature. So
Fair
it
point.
may not work there, or surprisingly it may. I just don't know enough about it.
I mean, relatedly though, um, so if you send back both the classic way of sending back SSML and this way of sending of including SSML, what happens?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
Um, it seems like to me what we would end up having to do is, as the result, just before the result came back, you would need to check to see if it was a screen that supported APL, and if it did, then
not send the regular
not send
SSML.
the text response back or do something else. I would have to research that. It's probably a known problem, like a known approach. I just don't know what that would turn out. Just never tried it. Maybe I was just lazy because the other way just worked for me, and I didn't.
Yeah, I'm just trying to
Didn't need
think.
to
I'm just trying to
check
think
into it.
how I can do things as easy as possible. So
Yeah, I'm like this works for me. I haven't needed to sync audio differently than and so now I've got a reason to need to do that. So we'll have to take a look. Um,
this is a fantastic feature. I mean, this is one of the
yeah.
features I loved in Interactive Canvas. I am thrilled to see it make an appearance in APL.
So you made me aware of this. I'm assuming it just barely came out today, probably, or just within the last couple of days, as far as the announcement. Um, and the documentation for APL is already updated. That's where I've gotten some of the information from.
Is APL Ninja updated?
I don't think so, because what happens is that APL Ninja is based on there's like a certain library or SDK that Amazon has to update and then publish, and then he would need to kind of deploy that. So I will be asking him. I'm sure that he would get it out fairly quickly. I don't think it's like a breaking change on
So
things.
it may be out by the time this
Maybe it
podcast makes
is.
it out.
Maybe it will be. So we'll check, and if it is, chances are I'll have some sort of example up there to show you what's going on with it. Even if it's just the one that's in the sample documentation, just so that you can start playing around with it. But that's what I hope to do. I'll probably spend some time this weekend looking at that and seeing what I can learn.
Yeah. No, so this is very, very cool. And there were some other things that came out in this APL, but we'll look at them another time.
Yeah. Oh, the one thing, and this is kind of the use case that would be like the classic use case for Alexa that was problematic. Let's say that you have a game, and it's kind of like a game show where you give a question and then you give an answer. So you give an answer and you wanted to show the screen
Yes.
and say something, and then you wanted to advance to actually show what the answer was.
Yes.
It was really difficult. You had to basically do animations based on the time. You'd have to actually like manually figure out where the time was of that audio file, and then tweak your animation to not advance to the real answer until that time had passed. Now you can just do it with a mark tag.
That's great. Yes. No, it's an excellent point.
So I've seen many a game on Alexa APL work around that exact thing because this tag didn't exist.
Even more exciting, or and related to that, I think, is that even so let's say you need to start a 5-minute timer or a 5-second timer, and you want to visually show that timer. How do you know when to start the timer depending on the length of the question that you ask? When you ask a question, you could take 1 second to ask a question or 3 seconds to ask a question. You don't want to start the timer until after you're done with the question. Now you can set a mark tag at the end of the question.
Yep.
And that triggers the event that starts the timer, that starts the whole display, a change in the display.
Yep.
Very good. Very cool. Lots of things we can do with this. This is why I love this feature so much.
Yeah. It just really lends itself. It's one of those things I feel like I've been asking for a long time, and I feel like they listened to me finally. So, and probably not just me, but
like we said, it's all about Mark today.
Yeah, let's just end that. that's enough talking about Mark.
So would love to hear other ideas that people what they want to do with this, what they are looking forward to doing with this. Have you tried it out? What are your experiences with it? Love to hear the feedback that people give. As always, reach out to us on Twitter, LinkedIn, comments below. You know where to find us. On the Alexa Slack channel is also a great place to find us. And we'll talk about all this stuff another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Alan.
Take care. Have a great week. Look forward to hearing your experiments with this.
We'll share it again.